Hello and welcome to your daily writing habit. If you are writing a book or thinking about it, or maybe you've started writing your book and are having some trouble finishing it, you are in the right place. Hello, I'm your host, Christine Whitmarsh. If you're looking for me online, Christine Ink, I-N-K, like the stuff you write with. Each day, I am sharing with you the writing habits I've learned over my 18 years as a ghostwriter, book coach, and author. I have found that three things in particular have a huge impact on your success as an author, and those three things are writing fundamentals, productivity, and mindset habits. And today I am so excited to have a special guest here on your daily writing habits, Scott Young. Scott is a writer who undertakes interesting self-education projects, such as attempting to learn MIT's 4-year computer science curriculum in 12 months, and also learning 4 languages in 1 year. Welcome, Scott. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, yeah, it's great to be here.
So we're going to have some fun here. I loved reading up on you and how you did. It said attempting to learn. You actually did learn MIT's 4-year computer science curriculum in 12 months, and that was super awesome. But I want to start today about your publishing career here.
Sure.
So, yeah, when we chatted before, you mentioned how you self-published 4 books and traditionally published one, which is your most recent book, UltraLearning, Master Hard Skills, Outsmart the Competition, and Accelerate Your Career. So for you, what were the major differences between self-publishing and being traditionally published?
So I think some of the differences, and I'm sure people who are listening to this who have kind of explored a little bit have heard a lot of the pros and cons lists, that typically when you self-publish, you have a bit more control, you get a little bit larger share of the revenue that's generated from the book. Traditional publishing, it tends to give you a little bit more breadth. At least if you go with the right publisher, they can help you get in bookstores and actually distribute your book to a larger market. But you often sacrifice a little bit of control and also a little bit of the revenue that might be generated from the book in that process. But for me, I think the big difference was more from me than the actual exterior process, that I wrote my self-published book sort of at a different stage in my writing career where, my writing process was, okay, I've got this idea for a book and, create an outline and then just start writing it. And the difference is that, 8 or so years later, when I wanted to write a traditional published book, I decided, I really want to spend a lot of time thinking about this. I want to do a lot of research. I want to really understand the subject I'm writing about in a lot more depth. And so that itself entails a lot of the differences in the writing process, that to just writing my opinion, I'm like, printing off reams of journal articles to read about science, or, reading biographies and citing my sources and trying to be more meticulous and careful about really understanding the subject that I wanted to write about in a lot more detail.
Very cool. And I like that you have both types of experience. That's very cool. That's one of the things that I end up talking to with new clients. They all want to talk about their publishing plan. And this is why I kind of laugh when I see the social media posts saying, traditional or self-publishing, like it's just, like Pepsi or Coke. And it's like, well, it really depends on who you are and the type of book you want to write and your goals and, how much you're willing to promote. I mean, there's so many X factors. That's why those posts kind of crack me up a little bit.
Definitely. I think that, it's good. I'm really glad I had both experiences. I think that if you've only had one, it's sort of hard to know kind of what to expect from both. I think sometimes authors who come from the self-publishing angle have this idea that like, well, when I get that, book deal with a real publisher, then people will finally, notice me and take me seriously. And then people from the opposite end are like, oh, when I finally self-publish, then, there won't be all these people controlling me. And I think that it's often the case that the book that you write is what you make of it, and you have to do a lot of the work and really be the champion of the ideas that you want to spread. And so it doesn't, a lot of the things are actually kind of the same regardless of whether you're self-publishing or going through a traditional publisher.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had clients, of course, doing this for 18 years, I've had clients publish through the very big publishers, the biggest ones, as well as the mid-level ones, as well as a lot of self-publishing clients. And yeah, the common denominator, of course, is a quality book. You really can't get around that whether you're self-publishing, especially now with, it's so crowded out there. Everybody's self-publishing. You can't get away with doing lesser quality. And then, the work you put into it. I mean, publishers, even the ones like I've worked with, Penguin and Simon & Schuster, they put a certain amount of work in, but you still have to do a lot of promotion. So I'd say the quality book and hard work are at the core of both experiences.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm excited about this next question because this is how you're known apparently. Your experience, and I'm taking this quote unquote. I want to hear about this. Learning the entire 4-year MIT computer science curriculum in 12 months without taking any classes. And I specifically want to know, how did you get the idea to even attempt this? And what challenges did you face along the way? And really, what did you learn about yourself by doing it?
Yeah, so this was actually, about 8 years ago now. I was just graduating from university. I'd studied business in school, and like a lot of people who, you spend a lot of time studying something, and then you're like, oh, maybe I should have actually studied something else. And the feeling I had was that I actually was really interested in entrepreneurship. I was interested in, people who are doing things like startups and running businesses on the internet. And at the time, I thought, well, the thing that you got to study then is business. And then after that degree, I kind of felt like I learned a lot of things that weren't terribly useful, and I felt like I didn't really know how to do the stuff that I wanted to do. I thought, what would be better is actually knowing how to write programs and actually make websites and do the things that are actually underlying that kind of thing. So I was thinking about going back to school. I was even looking into some programs and like, okay, how much money is this going to cost? How many years is it going to take? And around that time, I stumbled upon a class that was taught by MIT, but uploaded and put online for free. So MIT actually puts on hundreds, if not thousands, of their classes. They put, some of the material. Sometimes it's the lectures, sometimes it's just some of the notes, sometimes it's links to the textbooks. But they have various materials for different classes, and they just upload it online, and anyone can look at it. And so I was looking at one of the classes, and I was going through it, and I was really impressed. I was like, this is actually a lot better than a lot of the classes that I took in school. And so I was thinking about, maybe it might be possible to not just learn the material from a class, but to try to get the kind of education that I wanted to get, try to get something that is what is taught in a degree. So I put together a curriculum, sort of mixing and matching and trying to pair up against what an MIT student would take if they were going through the actual program with what available resources they had on their open courseware website. And so it kind of evolved into a fairly, a project that was fairly restricted in terms of what I was trying to do, where my goal was to try to take these classes and pass the final exams and do the programming project. So obviously this is a bit of a simplification. I wasn't joining a fraternity or going in the dorm room or doing the class presentations or essays, but in terms of the knowledge that you were covering, doing the final exams and the programming projects, I think is pretty good. It covers most of the stuff. And so when I was going through this process and setting it all up, I also recognized that it might be possible to do things a little bit faster. I know that sounds a little crazy to think that, not going to MIT might be faster than going to MIT. But when you think about it, there's certain things that if you have flexibility, you actually have a bit of an advantage. So classic example of that, anyone who listens to podcasts know that you can listen to recordings at 1.5 times the speed, or maybe even 2 times the speed, depending on the cadence of the person who's talking. And so therefore, if you are watching the lecture video versus attending an actual class, you can watch them a little bit faster. Another thing you can do is if you're having assignments, normally what you have to do is you work through the whole assignment, you have to go through it meticulously, and then you hand it in, and then maybe you wait a week or 2 weeks, and then you get your results, and by then you've already forgotten why you put the answer on question 1 that you did. Whereas if you're doing them and you have the solutions, you can just do the problem and then get the answer. And if you get stuck, you can look at how to solve the problem. You get that quick feedback and teaching that really allows you to get better at the problems a little bit faster. And so using this and some other ideas that I kind of learned through my own experiences in university, I decided that instead of trying to do it over 4 years, I was going to try to do it in 12 months. And so I started in September of 2011, and I started in October of 2011, and I finished in September of 2012, passing the last exam.
That is awesome. That's cool. I was just trying to mute it.
No worries.
There's a flyover, as I was talking to Scott about before our phone call here. I live near a naval air station, and I think they're filming Top Gun 2 overhead. I'm not really sure what's happening. So apologize to Scott and also our listeners here. That's
no problem.
So interesting. And I'm if I'm connecting dots here, your book UltraLearning, that came as a result of that, or tell me the connection there.
Well, so I think, that's one of the examples of the projects I document in the book. But I wanted to not just, I think that doing that particular project was certainly fascinating for me because I think we often have this assumption, and I think like many people do, that there's a fixed pace to doing things. That, if you want to learn something, you have to do it at this particular pace. You have to do it in this particular way. And what I found from documenting a lot of people is that if you're taking the practice seriously, you can often get better at skills at an accelerated pace, or you can often learn things in ways that don't have the same normal constraints. And so I found a lot of people who had accomplished some pretty incredible projects, people like Tristan Montebello, who went from having very little public speaking experience to being a finalist for the World Championship of Public Speaking after just 7 months, or people like Eric Barone, who wanted to build his own video game, and so he meticulously learned all the different aspects of video game art, programming, design, music, everything, and used it to make a game that ended up selling tens of millions of copies. And so I think these examples are a little bit extreme, but I wanted to use them to illustrate the underlying principles of how you can get better at things and how you can really get better at things yourself. So if you want to get better at writing, for instance, that's often a project that, just taking classes or getting another degree, maybe it'll help you a little, but probably not that much. And what you really need to do is figure out what is the process of getting good at writing and understand that so that you can improve your writing skill or your ability to understand a subject that you might be researching for or working for your first book.
Very interesting. So that definitely explains what people will gain from reading your book. They'll learn these principles so they can apply this to learning these things. And something you and I also talked about before was about authors, especially I work with a lot of nonfiction authors who it's hard sometimes for them to believe that they're experts in their space, and they're challenged by the idea of turning their knowledge and their life experiences into compelling subject matter for a book because they just don't associate themselves with the word expert. So how can people, especially those authors, position themselves as true experts, like really turn their existing knowledge and life stories into something that's a viable product that others would be interested in?
So I think you're absolutely right. Often we don't really fully appreciate all the things that we actually know. So there's actually a term for this. It's called the curse of knowledge. But basically it means that once you've learned something, it becomes kind of the background of your reality. It becomes obvious. And you forget the fact that a lot of people don't know that thing that you know. And so it can often be difficult to overcome this, where you think that, well, everything I know is obvious, but then maybe you start talking about it and it doesn't sound as obvious to people. So I think sometimes one of the ways to overcome this is to actually talk to people who you want to write your book to, talk about some of the ideas. I often find it funny, to me, some of the things that, again, from doing research and having these experiences, seem really obvious to me are things that totally strike people. I had no idea you could do that, or I had no idea that that was something that, we know about. And then on the other hand, there's sometimes that you're really excited about something and people are like, oh yeah, maybe I know that already, or maybe I've already heard that. So I think sometimes talking to people and explaining your ideas and talking about the things that you want to write about is often a good way to approach that. And then the other thing I think is very valuable is knowing how to extend your expertise. So maybe you feel like you have some knowledge, maybe you feel like you know something about it, but maybe you could go deeper. Maybe you could read, some biographies of some famous people and work their stories into your book. Or maybe you could read some of the science and understand it more detailed. So I think it's not just having expertise you already have, but knowing how to acquire maybe the little bits of expertise that you feel like you don't have. And I think if you have that ability, it gives you a lot more breadth as an author.
Fantastic. Very good. And I'm assuming that everybody should read your book, UltraLearning, to learn even in more detail about how they can do this and where to start in this process.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of ways that we can approach it, but I think one of the ways that really helps is to just have a project, to have some clear idea of what is the skill that you'd like to get good at and improve it. So writing tends to be a pretty big skill, but often you can break it down into little components. You can say things like, I want to get better at writing stories, because obviously storytelling is a big part of writing a successful book, even a nonfiction book. Or things like, I want to get better at research, and so knowing how you can gather research and put it together. So even if you break down and take on these little mini projects, you can improve your practice as a writer and as an author.
Yes, and that's so true what you just said. A story, that's the thing that people struggle with, storytelling, and that's the thing that can make or break a book and that can really elevate it to the next level, is if the author is just simply a fantastic storyteller. So that's a big skill right there.
Definitely, definitely. Because a lot of us, we have these ideas and this expertise, but if we don't deliver it in a compelling way, then the reader's just going to close the book and they're not going to benefit from all the things that you know.
Absolutely. That's why I'm always kind of harping on my authors to make sure they read my personal favorite book. I don't kind of going off track here, but my personal favorite
Yeah.
book on studying story is the book Story. It's exactly called that, Story by Robert McKee, just because he really breaks down how to tell a story like at the forensic level. And of course, my other tactic is to read a lot of great stories.
hmm Yeah, and deconstruct too. Often when you're writing and you're learning from other writers, one of the key skills is to what are the books that you like and what does the author do? How are they achieving that effect? So I found that a really enjoyable process in the sort of beginning parts of the writing is that once I kind of had some idea of, okay, this is the kind of book I want to write, and then finding some examples of books that I'd read like that and like, okay, what is the author doing? How do they structure it? How do they, set it up and go through the narrative flow and how do they, what are the sort of techniques that they're using to kind of pull me in as a reader so that I'll want to keep reading. And I would say that I borrowed more than my fair share of these little techniques when writing my own book.
That's so funny. That was the exact topic for today, as you and I are recording this. So you and I are recording for a
Yeah.
future episode, but my episode of Your Daily Writing Habit that ran today was exactly about what you said, how to read like an author.
Yeah, and that's very valuable. And so I think that having that specific mindset of you want to get better as a writer and you want to look at your craft analytically and break it down and improve it is a really good starting point. Now, of course, obviously there's a lot more involved in learning that you can optimize that process. But I think even just having that idea that, you're trying to get better as a writer and improve that craft and seeing it in that light, I think is very valuable.
Absolutely. So let's see. I have one other question here, another writing one here. So, with you as a writer of over a decade, multiple times over published author, what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to someone who feels like they have a book inside them? They've never actually written a book, but they feel overwhelmed looking at the process and especially the time commitment of writing a book.
Yeah, so my general advice is that I think the first goal of anyone who wants to be any kind of writer, book or otherwise, is to write about 100 articles. I think 100 articles is a good starting point to get your feet wet of just getting used to writing. Now, if you are thinking of a book, you have a particular book in mind, these articles could even form sort of the basis of maybe the chapters of your book. But this is usually my advice to people who want to get started in writing because I think until you've written your first 100 articles, it's very difficult to know how you feel as a writer. Once you've written 100 articles, it's a lot easier to say, okay, I know where I'm good at, know what I need to improve. But for a lot of people, they just haven't gotten that sort of baseline level of quantity of actual writing that they've done to really know where their strengths and weaknesses lie as a writer and to really have some sense of how much they like writing and how much they like to produce writing as a form of conveying their ideas.
That is awesome advice. I love that because there's so much you can get from writing those 100 articles. Like, you get the practice, you get to still practice the, basic 3-part writing structure of, making sure that what you're writing has a beginning, middle, and end. A book, of course, it's a longer version of that, but an article still needs to have a beginning, middle, and end, and figuring out what, like kind of what you alluded to, your writing pace, so you can figure out when it is time to write a book, you'll know how many thousands of words that you're able to write every week, so you can kind of pace your book. Yeah, there's great advice because there's so many different things you can get out of that.
And I think also a book is scary and big and huge and sometimes a little daunting, whereas writing an article is not so much. And so I think if you just have the habit of writing an article, and you can even be workshopping ideas for your book in your articles. I know quite a few authors, it's not a big secret that their books are sort of the evolution of writing about a topic a lot and then, okay, I think I've thought about this enough to actually write a book about it. So often writing a book is a lot easier when you've written about a topic many, many times before because you've not only had the chance to express those ideas, so you've thought about them more deeply, but then you also get feedback on them early. So you understand, okay, if I convey this idea this way, people really latch onto it versus another way, people don't get it or they get confused about what I'm trying to say.
So true. It's like literary A/B testing, like they do in marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And as I point out to my authors all the time, LinkedIn is just a great place to be doing this, to be putting those articles. There's so much organic reach happening on LinkedIn. I post an article there every week. You get so much feedback. It's just really a very words writing based community on that network. So that's a great place to start.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Medium, I think, are all really good for aspiring writers, depending on, how verbose you are and what kind of writing you want to accomplish. I think they can all help you kind of begin the process of getting your ideas and turning them into text.
Absolutely. All right. Well, is there anything else, Scott, that you'd like to share with my listeners, specifically about the habits you need to have in place to successfully write a book?
Right. So I think that if you're interested in writing and you want to understand the process behind getting better at skills like writing, I'd highly recommend checking out my blog. Right now I've written over 1,300 articles on there, so there's quite a bit of stuff, including about learning, productivity, many of the things that you would want to know a bit more about maybe if you're wanting to write a book. And you can visit my website at scotthyung.com. That's SCOTTHYOUNG.com. And then, of course, if you're interested in really diving deep into how you get better at hard skills, I also recommend checking out the book UltraLearning.
Excited to do that. Well, this is great. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Scott. I've learned a lot from you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was great talking about writing.
Just go ahead and sign off to my listeners here. Thank you all for joining us here on Your Daily Writing Habit, where I'm helping you write and finish writing an awesome book. And if you know someone else who wants to do the same, please point them in the direction of the show. They can listen on their Amazon Alexa unit, iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, all the places where the podcasts are. And until tomorrow, happy writing.